So has anybody got any specific questions they want to ask anybody from the panellists for morning? Yeah, lovely, some hands going over there. So, sorry, do you mind just introduce yourself quickly?
So, Pam Crispin from
Pam, lovely, thanks.
Thanks very much. It was really good, helpful. I'll make some notes. I just want to ask about Scheme A and what people's views are on the best model for Scheme A in terms of how often people change over, because it's one of the things that we've really struggled with, especially with rotors will be compliant, and there's issues about the changeover and you know, it's just rotor issues really. But it's also particularly about how some trainees do struggle with the changeover and what people's experience are of the different types of methods.
That's your mind.
So it's a really good question. What we've done is we've piloted lots of different styles of this, actually, and we will probably keep on doing this because of things like the new contract, which are going to have an impact on hours and weekends and so on. So we have got everything from a 1 day to 4 day, so as in 1 PHEM to 4 base specialty, and getting the work the other way around, which was incredibly complicated, to now most regions that do a Scheme A are doing either 2, 3 or 4 week blocks and alternating those 2, 3 or 4 week blocks. I don't know of anything longer than a 4 week block, and most are settling between the 2 and 3 week blocks. And there's a couple with a 1 week that have tried 1 week but found that quite a fast turnaround in the shift patterns. I think it's important that we try and have some flexibility within our own schemes. There are things like distance travelled that are going to make a difference if you're in a big region, at their particular bases, how far the hospitals are away and so on. I'll probably point it back to some of the trainees around have done. Is there anyone here that's done a Scheme A? Dave has done a Scheme A.
Yeah, I mean I did Scheme A where I was doing 2 weeks in ED, 2 weeks pre-hospital. So essentially 2 years away from my local region. So I'm a Yorkshireman and went down to east of England for 2 years and got adopted nicely while I looked after. I found 2 weeks working in ED quite good because it got used to working in the ED, so and got good working relationship with that MTC that I was dropping off patients with. With regard to the pre-hospital side, I didn't think it gave me enough time to get used to the system from the first aspect of joining that the pre-hospital organisation, and that was with 2 organisations, so with Magpas and East Anglia around us. So I think personally I probably would have preferred maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks rotated blocks. I think it's really important to, if you're doing the blended scheme, if you're working in a new hospital, that you do need to spend time at the hospital to get to know the staff, because it is, we all know when we move to different hospitals, it's a challenge to get used to the staff, and it's stressful, especially if you're a long way from home. You're having to really make those friendships with the staff so that you don't feel completely isolated away from home. I mean, thankfully, staff outlook were really good, and I fit in quite well, probably because I'm chatty, but I think others may not find it as easy. And I think that's a key thing when people are moving out of region. I mean, certainly we all know, and I think everyone knows in the room, that most cross environments and organisations are very friendly and look after each other. You know, you feel as if you're adopted into the team if you make sure you're honest and open with those organisations, with the stresses that you have around you. So I think there's a lot of aspects as well as the work and aspect which has to be taken into consideration. I mean, Pam was great with me around at East Anglia because I had to start going back and forth up to Yorkshire for family reasons, and you know, taking the route into consideration, you know, that was a real big plus. Whether that's going to be possible with the new contract, I don't know. And that's the challenge of trainees who can't do pre-hospital training in the region. I mean, Yorkshire now, the region is unfortunately come to a standstill at the moment. So people who want to do pre-hospital training, they have to go out of the region, and these are the challenges that they're going to be faced with.
Yeah, I think it's important to take all those things into consideration, and the Scheme A experiences that we've had fed back overall nationally, and surveys that we've done have all been very positive, actually. But it does require a slightly different way of thinking from the people that do the rotas, and you need to have a really close relationship with whoever's the parent specialty, which still 99 times out of 100 is emergency medicine for Scheme A, although we do have now an anaesthetic scheme A that will be operating, so which is great. So we'll get some more experience from there.
We've found that the anaesthetics parent specialties, they seem to find it much more difficult to be able to fit in a blended scheme. I have keep trying with the program director there. I'm not sure why it is that they find it more difficult than administrators to slot in, but we are trying similar. Emergency medicine, I don't see it being a problem, but anaesthetics based ones more of a problem.
Yeah. Sorry, and I think the anaesthetic problem is that because once you built in a training into a rota, you then have to consider their off days and leave days and all that kind of stuff, and then it becomes really complicated if they are supposed to go off to somewhere else in 3 weeks' time when they are supposed to be on their scheduled off day, and then when they come back, then how do you then put them back on the rota?
Most of them work really well by having two people share that one rota line.
Yeah, that
whether
works
you're
quite
being
well,
anaesthetics or your FEM, there's always somebody covering something,
Yeah.
and that's worked really well.
Yeah, I think it's probably, I just wonder sometimes whether it's worth just reminding ourselves why the blended scheme is the preferred scheme, and the answer is partly to allow people time to consolidate the curriculum, but actually because it reflects your future consultant working pattern. That was one of the main kind of considerations, is that actually none of us, in terms of subspecialist consultant practice, effectively do this full time. We all maintain our base specialty, and it'd be interesting to see what patterns of work people are in, and actually reflect on the fact that they do work. We do either 1 day a week or 3 days a month or little blocks and all sorts of variations. So it was really important to us that we create a training program model that actually reflected the way people would work in the future. And it isn't impossible to create those models around the region, but it does require some flexibility of thought and there are some real challenges that schools have faced in terms of trying to implement Scheme B. The consequence, or the blended scheme, the consequence of that is actually quite a lot of people apply for continuous training, which I think is actually really, really difficult. And it was never our preferred option from the intercollegiate board perspective, because it was really intended for people who were post-CCT, who had 12 months available to them to do as a kind of full immersion 12-month period. It wasn't really envisaged that there would be many sort of ST4 trainees applying for Scheme C and then putting themselves through NSA 1 and 2 and all the other stuff, and coming with little experience and going through their higher professional examinations in their base specialty. And we have kind of created a bit of a problem with the Scheme C popularity, with the enormous strain and financial and emotional and work strain that comes with that. To the extent that we may need to think, here's something to throw out there, we may need to think that you need to be more senior before you get into a Scheme C post. We may need to be thinking about changing those.
Advise, and it's only advised that looking at 10, 15 years experience, that juniors who are coming into Scheme C are massively disadvantaged, I think. And even with their own education, they're advantaged. That's meaning their own understanding of the blend of their specialty, their parent specialty, and what they're doing in hospital. And I would say that the college and the faculty should, and I would strongly support it, should probably say that Scheme C is only suitable for post-CCT, and that A and B, for the safety and to their advantage of their education, A and B should be open to PHEM registrars who are coming up the ST level as such.
And that's a really interesting point. I think as we start to as we counsel people seeking to enter subspecialty training, it's kind of perhaps really important, until those issues have been widely discussed with the lead colleges and agreed, that we give people a reality check about what Scheme C actually entails.
I think it's much greater than even that. The guys who work do 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, and then come back to EM, what we found at our base hospital and base MTC is the advantages of our trainees coming back and passing on their knowledge, their team working experience, and also when the patient's coming in, they're on the other side of the bed as a EM registrar, is massively phenomenal. and increasing the PHEM understanding within other specialities where we go, oh, I've seen you in ED as the registrar, now I'm seeing you in the orange suit bringing these in. That is, you know, we underestimate just how much that increases the credibility of PHEM, but also strengthens our EM and base specialities as well. A CCT person, you can argue, doesn't probably need it to become a consultant. They've done all their training. You know, in some respects, you can argue that they've done that bit already. They've established themselves, and if they disappear for a year, it doesn't matter. But actually, for the trainees, it's a huge thing. It's probably one of the biggest comebacks from PHEM training that I've seen in our department.
So it makes a massive difference delivering patients in, you know, someone from PHEM side delivering into someone who does PHEM, who's now in the emergency department. I'm sure you've all seen it, but it does make such a difference.
Mine's Phil Hyde, I'm the current convener, took over from Rod, just to say hello. There are some really senior trainees within non-EM specialties then who I think it would be a shame to say you can't do this because you're not post CCT, because actually I think we'd be missing out on some really strong, mature clinicians who have been through quite an extended programme and indeed longer than the EM programmes even before they go into PHEM. So I think as a guidance that you need to be older, wiser. It's a really sensible thing. That's what we're just learning from experience. I think guidance rather than a cut-off.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Scott. I think the experience has been that to start off with, there was quite a lot of schemes because initially it's an easier thing to slot into someone's training program, and therefore needs less interaction between the anaesthesia or emergency medicine or ICU, ICM training. But we do now, even though we have still got people in Scheme C and coming up next year in Scheme C, we are actively discouraging them from doing it for a couple of reasons. One is, what happens if you don't get one of the exams first time round? And the other thing is, referred to is, okay, they go through their Scheme C, they do all their exams, and they do it all, but then they've got maybe 2 years after that, until their CCT, what are they going to do then? And then we have this, they're not in a PHEM programme, but they still need PHEM exposure, PHEM experience, and that is a real problem that we've got to deal with. So I think you're right. I think if we are those Scheme C ones, we should be certainly sort of loading them certainly towards the end of towards the CCT, if not, you know, if you like to say more senior people, definitely.
Scott, can I comment from it? So I'm Scott Greer, ex-PHEM trainee, so I did Scheme C 2014-2015, and I'm anaesthetics and intensive care dual trainee as well. So from my point of view, Scheme C is difficult, and for all the reasons that we pointed out. And I think, Syed, you're right in the sense that the more senior you are as a trainee, the more likely you are to be able to succeed in Scheme C. The challenge with ruling Scheme C out at the moment is that there is zero parity between the parent specialties as we currently stand. It's great that Wessex have got a scheme starting in August, which is Scheme A with anaesthetics, but that's the first. And essentially we would exclude the majority of anaesthetic and intensive care applicants at the moment. So I think we should aspire to do that, but we need to work with the schools of anaesthesia, and I know that Intercollegiate Board and the Royal College of Anaesthetists are trying to do that, but we're a long way away from being able to
The
achieve
simple
that.
understanding I have, and sometimes it is simplified, only because my brain can only take it that way, is that the trainees that we are getting, their foundation has not been fully built. They're ST4, 5, 6, and we are asking them to become consultants in the future. With the CCT person, we can argue that they can spend a year away because hopefully they've got to that point where their foundation that their home or house is built on is solid without any cracks. So they can have that time away to build some scaffolding and an extension on the side as such. You know, but that is as simple as saying. Can I just add on that we run a Scheme A, and we had some very significant learning things there. Firstly, the rota-wise, you've got to have central points of the rota. You've got to have somebody who almost understands the PHEM side of training and the PHEM rota side as well as the EM side, so that clashes of coming off at 1 in the morning off a night shift on the car doesn't clash with being back on at 11 o'clock on an EM rota, etc. And it needs some real juggling. So we do have a central hub of the rota planning, and that was a major learning point for us. And that central point was actually an EM consultant who was also a PHEM consultant doing the middle grade rota. The other thing we very quickly realised, and we've shot ourselves in the foot, is night operations will start impinging on many of the PHEM's car response teams. Everybody's following that model generally, unless there's logistical reasons why they can't do it. That is a massive issue in terms of whether European working time directives or anything else. When you suddenly put the night aspect to it, it absolutely sends it's a grenade into the rota system, and that's something you almost have to plan a year minimum before you start going down that route. And we're still trying to do that. I wonder whether any of the panel have experience with night operations and how you're trying to blend them with night duty in ED and everything else.
And that's going to be for consultants working on that route.
Oh, we've got that issue as well, yeah. We almost kind of dismiss the consultants, you're grown-ups, so you need to sort yourself out, but actually the consultants are coming back going, it's not that easy, because if I do this here, my trust will have a little bit of a bellyache, and somebody may go, hang on a minute, you've only had that 6 hours rest, etc. So,
I mean, I've been invited as an education supervisor to provide education supervision on night shifts. I have respectfully declined, because you're right, in terms of my employed role, and I have PA allocations in pre-hospital emergency medicine, I'm employed as a consultant in emergency medicine and pre-hospital emergency medicine, it doesn't work. If I do a night shift, a full 12-hour night shift, in the context of my employment, it kind of destroys the rest of my PA allocation. I can see other colleagues in the room that it just doesn't work because we haven't got the critical mass of people to do that. So I do agree the full shift working and supervision, direct supervision in the full shift working, it has got real challenges, and we're maybe not yet big enough and mature enough to be able to fully support that.
I think it's great. This is a really good discussion, and it highlights actually what we're trying to do and have always tried to do in PHEM, which this is training versus service provision. So lots of the issues around service provision, how do I get rotas to work, how do I get people to man the service, how do I get, and actually it's about training and trainees, and we have a great opportunity to make this work for training and trainees by thinking differently. But what we need to do is forums like this where we share that learning from all the different areas. So our Scheme A does night shifts, so we have a 24-hour service, we do 12.5-hour shifts. We don't yet have consultants often doing supervision overnight, but we do. The trainees actually still do their 3-week rotations on a Scheme A, and it works much better because the night shifts you're much less likely to be off late. It's a bit like a shift in an ED, you're handing over a lot of the time. Which is great, there's not the pressure there. And they do fewer shifts, so you need more of them actually at that particular point. Our challenge will come with the new contract. We're just working out currently now how we fit that in, and that includes our induction course. Our current national induction course and things like this do not fit into the new contract, which is really disappointing. Very quickly, just picking up on a point from Ian, it's not widely publicised. It should be, and we will publicise it more. Continuing professional development afterwards, once you complete your PHEM training. So the Royal College of Emergency Medicine have agreed that EM trainees can, with their local head of school permission, do up to a day a month in PHEM, once they're completed, to continue their PHEM exposure. The military, you may actually have agreed that you'll get that, at least that. You may get more, actually. We're still waiting to work with the other colleges to get some of their agreement, but that will come out of, more than likely, your personal development days or your EM study days and things like that.
Can I just clarify that? So RChem have basically said that if someone comes out with, what I'm trying to say is there any provisions, and how official is that? Is that a local understanding with the local deanery and School of EM, etc. And also, has it have to be, what my real worry is the guys who are not passing the FIMC, and literally on August the 3rd or whatever, it's, well, that's your FEM done with, I'm really sorry. You know, we can't support you because, you know, there isn't a place now on the aircraft, etc. And then secondly, you'll have to go back to full EM, etc. So, do they have a provision that they can go and do 1 day a month FEM, but they must have had their CCT or their FIMC, etc.? And also, is it something that's stipulated by RChem completely that if they have come out your scheme and they're within EM in your region, you've got to provide this?
Right. So RChem have, through their Training Standards Committee, very kind, I'll put that the phrase, TPDs have it, but they have agreed that subject to your head of schools agreement, the place you go back to, that FEM trainees who completed their FEM year can have a maximum of a day a month back in their FEM, in the FEM service to continue that. Now, why they say head of school is because obviously you may have FEM training needs, but you may have EM training needs at that point as well. You've got other exams that you may be behind on or need to do and so on. So it needs to be balanced for the individual trainee. There is no obligation on any service to provide that. It has to be with local agreement.
Yeah, I think the ones that haven't, like for example, haven't got the exam, it's sort of, I think it's easier for the deanery or them to say, you know, we're going to continue to support this person because they, you know, because they need more support to be able to, you know, to be able to do the exam. If they're completely out the other side, I think it becomes more of a, it is a bit more difficult.
I find this difficult to understand though, because if it is a trainee in difficulty, if they haven't passed, and if they don't pass their FChem, FRChem, or their, you know, MChem, etc., that almost becomes not essentially a trainee in difficulty, but a trainee who needs extension maybe of their training.
Yeah.
But that is not actually officially, unless I've got this wrong, provided for. My first lot are going through now, so if one of my trainees don't pass their FIMC, then where do I stand to turn around as TPD and say, I want extended for another 6 months in FEM? There isn't actually any part, is there? That
So there is.
actually
So it comes to the training assessment panel. So the training assessment panel is informed by not only the paperwork that's sent in by trainees, but by the educational supervisor and training program directors.
Yeah.
And this is where you need to, if we move on to what's now I think called doctors with differing needs, rather than trainees with difficulty. So if those sort of trainees, you need to be monitoring and picking this up early in order to try and support the trainees, as you'll hear this afternoon, I'm sure, and guide them through. An exam failure alone does not necessarily mean that you're in difficulty. You've had a bad day, whatever it may be. It does not in any other specialty put you into I'm a trainee in difficulty. So the same is true. So when you come to the TAP, what the TAP looks at is your evidence of matching the curriculum elements, and also your assessments, but then the opportunities available to the trainee in order to be able to complete that. So in terms of an extension to training, there's some relatively clear guidance around that to extend training. If you've not been able to have the opportunities to meet the requirements of the curriculum, then you're given an extension to training. If you have had the opportunities, so we use Sentinel events largely as a summary of that, but you haven't made the most of them, then actually that doesn't mean that you necessarily need an extension to your training program for more exposure, but you need some other focus stuff, and we wouldn't extend your training for that. So there is some guidance around extension to training. It needs to be fed in early through TPDs so that people are aware of it, because the big issue in small specialties like us is actually places for this to be done. So it's very difficult for me to go, Ian, would you mind taking another trainee for 6 months and funding them in August when we've just recruited to your places and you're full? So we need to know really early on.
And that is mostly seen at the TAP, isn't it, Simon? That, you know, I know what you're saying about early warning, But if somebody comes to the TAP, does the TAP then advise that school of EM that look, there's going to be another 6 months, we have looked at every bit of evidence and they do need that extra bit of exposure?
So that is the main confirmation area for it. But ideally what we're looking for is the intelligence network of TPDs fed by their educational supervisors early on to inform that. We'd rather not get there and just do it at the TAP.
Just to follow on from that, if I may, the other problem that you've got if you hinge purely on the exam is that obviously if you've got a Scheme C candidate who does the exam in July, their FIMC results won't be back before they've already returned to their EM or their anaesthetic post anyway, because the results take about a month or so to come out. So they'll be well and truly into August before they even know whether they've passed or not. So if someone who's otherwise fine falls over just on the FIMC, which is very easy to do, believe me, then I think there's an element of the local solution to that. Certainly, we've had that in the past, haven't we, with one individual who we agreed a sort of a local arrangement where they did some continued supported PHEM shifts in their own time, effectively with the support of the deanery for both specialties, and that worked quite well, because I think the problem that you've got, particularly on Scheme C, I don't know if Scheme A, are they allowed to sit the exam 18 months into Scheme A, the FIMC, or do they have to wait till 2 years for Scheme A? I.e., do you get 2 bites of the cherry, essentially?
No, it's still 11 months full-time equivalent, so it's
so you still have to be at the end of their
yes,
Scheme A,
wherever that
so,
divide falls.
So ultimately there's still going to be the same situation arises for someone who's otherwise fine, who falls over on the exam only. They probably just need to resit the exam, don't they? That's the reality. But
and maybe just
then,
one part of the exam.
Yeah, but then to do that when they're not working at all in PHEM would be an almost impossible task. I think that would be unfair to ask them.
It hasn't been, it may be almost impossible, it hasn't been impossible. On this diet just being, we've had a number who've succeeded in that, exactly that challenge.
But what I mean is, to have some sort of local arrangement quite simply to facilitate these people continuing to do some shifts, even if it's in their own time. I think it's otherwise to totally then separate yourself from PHEM and then have another crack at the exam is a brutal thing to do.
My only other concern is those words in their own time.
Yeah.
That is a significant concern. I think it's unfair to ask a trainee that we've supported for a year, 2 years, who, as you say, just has that bad day, and we've got to give them that support.
It's as you saw from the map, there's only 2 areas, two health education areas in England and one in Northern Ireland that don't have a PHEM training programme currently. So if people are going back to their own deanery, and the likelihood is there is going to be a PHEM training programme in that area, there is communication between the training programme directors, both in their meetings and the fact they all know each other. It's a small community, this. So we are probably able to provide a local solution that is coordinated between where you were in doing your training and where you currently are, if those are different places, back in your base specialty that will support you for your next time. It is a small community, and trainees themselves also organise things as well. But it's less of an issue for the written, if that's the component of the NSA that you're having to resit, more of an issue for the clinical side of things, because it's not necessarily quite so straightforward currently to hop onto a new organisation that you've never been with before and say, I'd like to do maybe a day a month so I can keep up my clinical skills in your local area. So I do recognise that, yeah.
Can I just follow on, just for this may be relevant as well for Dilly's question, but the trainees who haven't been in difficulty but are finishing at the end of ST5, for instance, who've got 2 more years to go, does anyone's scheme feel an obligation to continue offering them exposure? Because we've had quite a lot of discussions in our region as to whether or not
I don't think it's an obligation, but it's an advantage.
But clearly there are 2 aspects of that. So one is if you have trainees who sit in your region who you would be keen to have as consultants in the future, then you would continue to offer to allow them to come and work on your unit. But I think all regions now are having trainees who are not from their region who want to continue exposure to PHEM. And we've had quite polarised discussions in our unit as to whether or not we have any obligation, not from a national point of view, but from a local point of view, to continue offering them exposure. We don't have the capability to do it in terms of third seats in our shifts, but I just wonder what everyone else is doing.
I don't, again, I wouldn't use the word obligation to have that seat for them as soon as they've passed out. We appreciate the fact that they've done 2 years with us, and they've done, or 1 year with whichever scheme you're in. However, what we are finding is that trainees are smart working out their way of job planning and where they want to go, and they're often coming out at that level with 1 year, 1.5 years left to go before consultant posts are looming. Most trainees, both outside as well as coming out, are already contacting CCT is this date. I want to come back to EM here, even though I'm being now. So that's one thing that's happening there. We're getting emails going, I want to be a consultant at one of these hospitals, but is there space for me to come back into your PHEM unit to work if I base myself life-wise, family-wise here? The other way we're finding is that people are saying, I've worked at 2 years, I've loved my time here, etc. I'm actually looking, can I get EM to do it, finish off here, because I've now solidified my home, my family, etc., and I want to stay here. We've not had the other way, which is actually the problem of saying to someone, thank you very much, but we don't have the space anymore, and you need to go away and find yourself a PHEM job somewhere else, etc. I'm being honest. But that may not be true in other units. I think if we have an obligation, it is to try and help them make up their mind and structure early on their career path, and with a very understanding of family orientation and what their requirements in their life is, and to get that in early.
Yeah, I'm just following on really from Scott's point, really, David Gill, the National Director of EMRTS. There is a challenge here, and I don't think it's insurmountable, around when individuals have got their training complete in PHEM and they haven't CCT'd in their core specialty, and addressing that gap. And I think one of the things I've been reflecting on the last couple of weeks is how you commission your service. Because if you set yourself up as a consultant-led, consultant-delivered service, then there is an opportunity. Then you need to think about that when you're commissioning services, and thinking about how you can be creative about registrar-led schemes as well, and incorporating registrars into your service. I think is quite important, because that the individuals who wish to work for your service as consultants in the future have an opportunity to continue their PHEM exposure. So I think that's just something I think people need to reflect on, and I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on how they're doing that. I guess the second thing I wanted to really just make, and this was a question more than anything else, was how do you get the balance right between supervision and unsupervised shifts? Because certainly in Wales we went for a consultant-led, consultant-delivered service, and we've done quite a lot of work over the last year to look at how we can be creative about having, particularly in phase 2, a number of PHEM car shifts put out, where our PHEM trainees are working with CCPs with remote top cover support, as I'm sure other services do. But I'm just trying to think about how else we could be creative in doing that. Even if you've got a consultant on scene, for example, how you could allow that trainee to develop, being able to manage patients remotely. So just got to put that out there and see what people think.
I could probably, so in terms of nationally, you're right, there's a variation in direct consultant supervision between probably what a few years ago was 20%, and up to about 40-50% at the most. Now we're seeing a shift, and it is 30 to 96% consultant supervision. It's odd when we look at something and say, isn't consultant supervision a dreadful thing? I've got too many consultants here, I just don't know what to do anymore. Isn't it awful? It's a brilliant system. I think this is actually what I'd like to see in these sort of days as part of the sessions and when we develop them, is how we supervise. I think that's the real key to this. Part of that, it's normally down to the supervisor. If I take my own experience, and I only convey that, as soon as I become a consultant, actually I'm still probably my registrar head, and I like to be close. I'm not as confident, I get in there very quickly. And I still see that in consultant colleagues around me, that are newly qualified consultants who, as soon as a trainee gets into some sort of clinical situation or environmental situation on scene that they don't feel comfortable with, they're in there and they're taking over. As opposed to getting a bit older, I don't know what, wiser, but definitely older, and I'm able to now judge those trainees, actually take the situation as a whole and decide how far and how close I need to be, and not necessarily be able to, I'm going to jump in there, but actually talk to them and actually give little cues. So I think it's actually how we supervise, and we don't spend enough time teaching people how to supervise. I think that's a real gap in our market here, personally.
So I work in a very, very, very heavy anaesthetic-led, kind of consultant-led department, and we, as a cohort consultants, find it very difficult to step away and leave the anaesthetic trainees, especially at ST6 and 7. We seem to think that we still need to be on top of them, and so that's been a massive learning curve for me as well.
Yeah.
To learn about how to take a step back and to be, it's not necessarily the dumb thing to be in the coffee room, but actually sometimes you need to be a little bit further away than in the anaesthetic room or just outside the door hovering.
We're trying to drive patient safety, but actually autonomous practice, because what we don't want is all of a sudden, the first time you're a consultant FEM practitioner on your own, to be the first time you're on your own. We actually have not, you've got to have made that phased stage. Thank you very much, Ron. Yeah.
I think as the trainers concept moves forward, and I think the board, we have been, because of all the other things that have been distracting us, we have not developed the trainers in the way that we intended to do from day one. So we have not taught people stage mentorship. And I do very much recognise, and within the service that I work with, we have our more junior consultants who are very open about the fact that they've completed their FEM subspecialty training, they've come through, they've joined the service, they've been appointed as consultants in the hospital, they're also consultants in the pre-hospital service, and all of a sudden they're supporting trainees, but they actually feel like all new consultants that they shouldn't really be consultants because they still have the registrar hat on, and they do not have the confidence and the experience to let someone make a mistake. Let's say that out loud. Sometimes need to let someone make a mistake, provided the patient isn't going to come to harm. Sometimes that's a hugely, hugely important, we've all done it, hugely important element of learning and stage mentorship. And there is a transition point where there are some trainees where they need that very immediate phase 1A hands-on support, but then they need taught, developed, grown. And within any cohort of trainees, there'll be some people who in terms of stage mentorship, you can step back earlier than others, and there are others where you might not be able to step back. Now, as we mature trainers, those are the sorts of things we need to teach ourselves and practice and reflect on.
And add to that, that's not just a doctor thing, because the services are clearly multi-professional and an understanding of this phase mentorship and across the whole service, and empowering our multi-professional team to actually provide this across the board is a strength to the trainees, not a weakness.
So I'm going to take one more question because I'm conscious of sort of lunch. So it was good Simon make his point, and then I think Ty's got his hand up. So we'll do one more question. We have got another session later on built in, but I've deliberately overrun this because I think some of the stuff that we get is really helpful for everybody.
It is. Just very quickly, in response to yours as well, I don't know whether you've ever tried, but actually having a consultant around all the time, have you ever tried the consultant as the doctor and the trainee supervising, or rather giving feedback? And that's really powerful. Not only is it in terms of your grading, but in terms of giving feedback as well. And actually we should be setting good role model examples of what is expected of them.
So what we'll do is we'll go to Saeed just for the last question, and then Steve, do you know if the guys on Skype can sort of talk into us as well?
Should be able to.
Cool. So is anybody on Skype got a question for anybody?
I've got one, John. It's Matt.
Hi Matt, yeah, cool. Thanks James, mate. Fire away.
It's regarding the tap and the and the point that Ian made about mapping needing to be elements rather to themes rather than elements. I just wondered if I could invite some comments from the panel about what the best way to go about doing that is, and the best way to avoid trainees, excuse me, from not getting through the TAP or having not mapped, say, enough competency.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Matt. We've got a lecture on TAP specifically later on, immediately followed by another Q&A session. Is it okay if we defer that till then, mate? Is that possible?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Cool, thanks, mate. So just last point from Said then, unless anybody else on Skype's got any other questions at all. No, cool.
But can I just suggest again that you've got all the relevant people in the room, etc., that we develop this training as one. I know it sounds really daft, but I've never seen a video or anything very equivalent of bad way of doing it, good way of doing it. You know, we've got some incredible things that I've said. You know, I don't think I've let any of my trainers do a mistake, and actually, as Rob says, the countless hundreds of mistakes I've done in PHEM over the years. You know,
I've got some
actually
videos.
But can I suggest that we try and lead this training, because this is a fantastic start this day as it is. But maybe we should develop that kind of stuff as well, that of links, or to give us an understanding of what is our expectations. And a DVD, short DVD, allowed not to do it. The only other thing is the digital side of things. It's so easy for us to tick the box at the moment, going, well, you're out on your own today, but you can call us any time. You know, what does that really mean? To me, it's a mobile phone that is purely dictated on reception, where I am, whether I'm with my kids at school, or whether I'm shopping or whatever, and they can get hold of me. And I think we pay a lot of lip language to that, and there are very good digitalised systems, much more relevant and much more concrete in terms of real-time visualisation than what we do, which is camera that goes, right, the trainee is phoning in, you actually see the patient there, and you can give better advice than what we've been doing for years. And I know there's Skype systems, there's Google systems, etc., although there's security and etc., but possibly a more of a discussion on those for training the trainers for the future, and developing that and understanding what we're doing. Because actually phone communication is all we've generally got at the moment, but there are things that are developing out there significantly to allow that safety netting for our trainees.
Yeah, so just on that point, so today obviously we're privileged to have Steve videoing us to be able to share this, and that's great, and we're very grateful to the Health Board for providing that. So there's no reason, the idea of the videos that we're collecting today is to start to build that record of the speakers so people can access, without having to do a day like this so frequently, some CPD for supervisors. So I mean, I'm more than happy to be contacted. If people are keen to do something like that, do some videos either within your local systems of some, good examples of supervision, bad examples of supervision. You can just use a sim man for that sort of thing. Get in touch with me, and we can try and put it in the same place as the videos that we're producing from this, and build a bit of a portfolio, and that's probably something we can look at contribute to locally as well.
Can I just take that argument a little bit further around actually the approach to making that remote supervision call as well? We all think we're good at it, but we're not, and there's no standardised way of doing it, and everyone develops their own nuance. And actually, not just using that from a point of view of understanding what help and advice is needed, but using it as an educational tool as well, and then that forming part of a work-based based assessment later. I think so that just taking that, so using the technology but having some process behind how you do that and how you, how that comes together would be helpful.
And personal cameras, which I think about for actually your supervisor actually seeing what's there. We've looked into that, don't we?
So some services are trialling those.
Yeah.
And the technology's there.
And the technology, we've had a bit of resistance on the deanery, to be fair, about setting it up, confidentiality, things, that sort of thing.
We're not trialing, we've gone further, we've now put it in our system. We carry on a system called real-time visualization, which is a tiny little camera attached. It is a separate system from anything else, phone-wise, Google, Skype or anything like this, which goes directly to an ambulance service server as such, and has no other ways of breaking into it. Now we're happy to send that out, and we're happy to develop that with other people, but that's the system we're using at the moment to see it on a laptop with the relevant people have the security to get into that system and see what the trainee is actually dealing with at that time.
Cool. So we're just going to do the last point from Simon, if that's all right, just because I'm conscious you probably all start.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's
in
cool.
terms of
That's
your
okay.
T3 point, the training the trainers, I hold my hands up actually for this one in terms of the PHEM training committee. We've done a lot in getting programs up and going and various aspects, and actually because we want to focus so much on trainees and we're doing things slightly differently, that's taken some time and some logistics and some discussions.
You've been busy.
And, you know, but we have now, and this is the first event really, the PHEM is going to be setting up a framework for this, and I'm really pleased that you're interested in that, because papers sent out a few days ago for the training committee have got in there an existing framework as an example, and we're looking for a lead for that, so I've got your name for that, which is brilliant, thanks Simon. See you at the training committee meeting. And this is the first of those events that we're holding at least one or two national trainer events with supervisors, clinical supervisors, and then our next one is about local trainers as well, and that's an area that we need to develop further as well. So thanks Simon for volunteering.
I'll tell you what, I'll say when they're on camera, we'll run the next one in Oxford. How's that?
Thank you.
There's
There's a queue already, I'm afraid.
thanks.
You're in the queue.
I think touching on something that Simon said, you have to be careful of making sure that, because GMC is now getting more and more anal about dividing the roles and responsibilities of a clinical supervisor as opposed to an educational supervisor, and it's the role of, and we need to make that difference as well, and also it's a completely different responsibility and training to be a supervisor like that. And being at the sharp end myself, I kind of have gone through some difficult process when the clinical supervisors didn't quite know how to fill out the forms, and as an education supervisor you're catching up, these forms are not going to work on tap, and it's a very difficult process, and I think it's fantastic what you've done today. But I wanted to kind of just ask about how all this builds in with the curriculum, and whether in a very consultant-based, consultant-led service, which is essentially more air ambulance kind of based service, is that what the curriculum needs, or do we have to think beyond that? Because at the moment I'm seeing a very much a skewed training in that sense when I read the curriculum and when I see what's happening.
So, is it right if I...
Go on then.
It's yours. It's all yours, Phil.
Yeah. And then that is it. The food will just be taken away and go on off you.
So, I mean, the first thing to say, which was really very well demonstrated by Simon this morning, that the curriculum is very wide-ranging, and as you all know, and you're right that the current is a challenge to us within training programs to actually provide the breadth of coverage for the curriculum. Now, the curriculum, interestingly, was not designed, I've stolen this phrase, was not designed for trainees. It was designed for patients. And that's really key, actually. And you know, the reason we're sitting in the room is because we're patient advocates, and it just so happens that in order to advocate for patients, we're training people to be future advocates. And what do patients need? Well, actually, it happens, I believe, and the IBT believe currently, that that patients need clinicians who can provide a wide spectrum of pre-hospital care, not just a narrow spectrum of critical care provided by on an airframe. To that end, the current examinations assess across the whole of the curriculum, and on the last exam diets, then across every single unit that Simon has described to you, there are areas where everybody's struggled, and so the exam is very broadly samples from the curriculum, and we perceive that through the through analysis which we're going to publish analysis of the exam to pick out these are the units within each of the themes that people will be struggling on, and they are not just focused down on air ambulance work.